everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubumi Olajide, and today we're going to be having conversation about entrepreneurship in the oil and gas industry. And joining us today to have that conversation is Corley. He is the CEO and co-founder of Wellhub, which provides software solutions for option operators in the oil industry. He's also the managing partner of Digital Wildcatters, which, among other things, produces the oil and gas startup podcast, which Jake co-hosts with his partner Collin. Jake also owns and operates his own oil field, and from what you hear from our conversation, he might be the most natural entrepreneur I've ever spoken to. So, without further ado, I think I just jumped right into the conversation.
My route is a little bit unconventional. I grew up in College Station, Texas, which is the home of Texas A&M University. So yeah, most kids usually grow up and go to school there at A&M. I was a little bit different. I decided to go to the Marine Corps and my job was communications maintenance in the Marine Corps. So I did that from 2009 to 2013. I was stationed in California, which was wonderful. Spent a lot of time at the beach, a lot of time in the desert, a lot of time in the mountains when we weren't training. So it was a good time. But I knew that I wanted to kind of do something more entrepreneurial, and I wasn't sure exactly the route that I wanted to go. I didn't know the industry that I was going to work in. I thought I was just going to be, possibly going to Silicon Valley and working with some tech startups or something. So I got out and I went back to school. Obviously, in the U.S., you have the GI Bill, which if you serve in the military, you can have your school paid for 100%. And then since I enlisted in the Marine Corps out of Texas, you actually have even more benefits. And so I could have gotten a full master's degree, 100% paid for by the U.S. government. So I decided I want to move back to Texas and go to school, take advantage of that. So I went to school for computer science. I made it about 3 semesters, and then I ended up meeting a guy who had been a software developer for 20 plus years. He was really good at what he did. And then he kind of started mentoring me on how to kind of write code in the real world. Well, come to find out, his family owns a pretty good size oil and gas company here in Houston. And so he had written kind of some software as a project for his dad's company, but they weren't using it yet. And we got together and he he kind of pitched the idea of, hey, what if we started a company around this, and kind of brought it to the market. So we did some research about it, and come to find out there was a huge market for that. So I finished out my semester at school. I quit my job, and we went and raised about $500,000 in friends and family money. And then we just started building software. And so the software that we were building was kind of quote unquote end-to-end software that kind of ran the full life cycle of a well and oil and gas operations and upstream. So managing production, managing the accounting side of the house, managing the land and leases, all of that kind of rolled up into one. So I did that until 2016, in a 2016 timeframe, and then I left that and then started Wellhub about a week later with the new team, new technology, solving the same problem but a little bit different angle, kind of just everything that I had learned through GDS. Where from there, let's see, I started podcasting right around the same time. So end of 2016, getting on the podcast with Mark LaCour on Oil and Gas This Week. That was a cool experience. Had no clue how to podcast or how to be on the radio or anything like that, and so it's been a fun ride. Still do that today. Collin McClellan is my business partner in pretty much everything. So if anybody is listening to the podcast or watching any of our vlogs, we are pretty much together all the time. And so he actually started in the field roughnecking straight out of high school, 18, 19 years old in Midland, Texas. And so Midland is right in the middle of the biggest oil field, or the most booming oil field in the whole world right now, which is the Permian Basin. So he started, just roughnecking on rigs. I mean, and right out of high school, you can make $80,000 a year, no experience whatsoever. And so he just worked his way up over the next decade. And then him and I linked up about 4 years ago now. And we kind of realized that we hit it off. We kind of had the same dreams and aspirations. We worked well together. We were enough alike, but enough different to kind of balance each other out. And he ended up leaving his job in 2017 or 2018. I can't remember. At the very beginning, it was one of those years. We weren't really sure exactly what business venture we were going to be pursuing together. I mean, I still had Wellhub going at the time. We were hacking away on that. And then we ended up buying some oil wells in Oklahoma, outside of Tulsa area, in Pontiac Creek County. And later on, we kind of stumbled upon this niche in oil and gas of, both of us having grown up as kind of digital natives. We've seen social media. We were on MySpace, we're on Facebook, we've seen LinkedIn kind of evolve over time. And we realized very early on that nobody was really putting out content at this point in time into the oil and gas industry. I mean, obviously, I was still doing the Oil and Gas This Week podcast and stuff, but that was pretty much it. And I think seeing kind of the traction of that, and then seeing just a lack of other types of content. I mean, if you were to go to YouTube and just try to find answers to anything oil related, you're mostly just going to find videos that are animations that were put out by Schlumberger or Halliburton, one of the big service companies. And so we absolutely love this industry. And so we wanted to make it our mission to kind of shine a light on things that people in the industry were doing, educate people on how things are done about the industry to kind of bring more young people into the industry. But then with our Oil and Gas Startups podcast, to kind of highlight and showcase some of the stories of entrepreneurs in this space and why we all kind of love working in this industry.
That sounds very interesting. I just noticed a trend while you were giving your brief background. Very often you just say that you left one thing and immediately jumped into another, even though you weren't sure exactly what it was. Would you say that you're naturally business minded and entrepreneurial, or was that just something you felt like, okay, I'm past this stage and I need to go into something new?
I think I've always been this way. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day. In high school, I played in a lot of bands, so like rock bands. I played guitar, and so I played in probably 4 or 5 different bands from the end of high school to like early college. And when I really stop and think about that, I was kind of the ringleader of the band. I was the one who was getting us bookings. I was the one who was taking care of our recordings. I was doing our editing. I was even writing a lot of the songs. And looking back now, I think that was kind of like the start of. I'd always been a very creative person, but I think I had never really channeled that until like my mid 20s into something business, I guess more related. But I think that was kind of the early stages of that. So, yeah, to answer your question, I think I've always just kind of been wired this way.
Did you have any anxiety when you left school 3 semesters in to just jump right into the business world? Were you worried that you might not be well equipped to start, or were you just like really confident in what you had at the time?
I was confident in what we had built. I was confident that we had a competitive advantage having complete access to a very large oil and gas company. Um, I've always been maybe overconfident in some of my abilities, and I think sometimes I mean, a lot of times it's worked out, sometimes it hasn't. But I think confidence is extremely important. I think as long as you don't let your confidence turn into arrogance. But like you said, I came into this industry with absolutely no knowledge. But very quickly, being able to sit down with engineers and geologists and landmen and accountants, and for the software that we were building, the only way that we could do it is I had to learn their jobs. And I had access to people to do that. And then, in addition to that, I just read everything I could possibly get my hands on, every news article. I went and bought petroleum engineering textbooks, and I read those cover to cover. I read an accounting textbook cover to cover for oil and gas accounting. And just, it was trial by fire. I just learned over time. And I've never been one to fear failure. I mean, failure is going to be part of the process. It's part of the entrepreneurial process. You'll never meet somebody who didn't have any failures along the way. But every single one of those, as long as you can kind of figure out why you failed and why you landed the way you were, you just learn over time and you just become better. And you learn to try more things and fail faster. And failure is never fatal. And I think that's it's an essential attribute for any entrepreneur who wants to be successful.
That's very interesting. I don't know if this is something that was common back when you were still younger and you were in school. Right now, people really put lots of emphasis in formal education and really sticking to the program and not deviating too much. The fear of not getting jobs and the fear of not having like a stable income and not having your life set up properly. Wasn't that something that you were concerned about? Because lots of people in my generation, okay, maybe we are more confident in technology and running businesses around that, but people who are in really technical backgrounds like software engineering and engineers and scientists, they don't really want to deviate too much from from conventional or formal education because they believe that that's the safest route to kind of secure the future. So was that something that was common in your day, and was that something that you were thinking about personally?
Honestly, no. I've always been a risk taker with everything that I've ever done. From joining the Marine Corps was a huge risk. Obviously, you never really know if you're going to survive that. I ride motorcycles and I used to ride through the mountains all the time. There was a huge risk that I could just fly off the side of the mountain. I don't know. I kind of like to just live in the moment and I like to kind of pave my own path. And I'm not really worried about security or anything like that. I mean, it's while it is important, I mean, it's a good feeling and stuff. You can't really, I can't achieve the goals that I want to achieve in life and maintain that same level of security. Even now, with the different businesses that we run, there's always the possibility that everything could just fall apart, right?
Hmm.
But for me, that's exciting because that presents another opportunity that's going to be challenging me to really see what am I made of. Because to me, that's kind of like a game. Um, and so I honestly get anxiety thinking about the 9 to 5 daily job working for somebody else and not being an entrepreneur. It honestly just kind of takes my breath away a little bit.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so let's go right into some of these businesses now. Let's start with Digital Wildcatters. So I found it a few months, like it's been a long time, almost about 8 months now that I've been following on ever since you've been on the podcast with Mark, and I've had Mark on the podcast already, and we had a very nice talk about the oil and gas industry. So, more about the oil and gas industry and Digital Wildcatters. Starting up, did you have a good idea of what you wanted to do? Was it just like having this proper communication channel between, I think, more young people, because the older generation kind of understand some of the importance that the oil industry brings, but it's the younger generation that maybe don't really understand, or they've been fed a bit too much of negative press about the oil industry, and it kind of shaped their ideas a bit too solidly. So, starting out, what was the motivation behind it initially to really go about this Digital Wildcatters? And excellent name, by the way.
Yeah, we got lucky. I don't know if that came to me in my sleep or what, but we coined that quite a while before we even had the podcast, and we decided, hey, this makes sense for for what we're doing now. The podcast came about because we were sitting around. We've just been very involved in the oil and gas startup community over the past few years, and so we were having a lot of conversations with some just really bright and just great people who were starting different companies, and we had just some awesome conversations. We were sitting at lunch one day with a guy, and we said, why aren't we recording these conversations and like putting this out as a podcast? Like, I think somebody would get some value out of it. And so that's kind of how it all started. And then we kind of, began to kind of put some shape to that. And obviously staying, niche focused on the oil and gas industry and specifically on entrepreneurs in that industry. And it's just been a fun ride. Honestly, the reception has been much greater than we ever anticipated. We've gotten just so much good feedback. We've had a lot of great guests, and honestly, it's been fun. Like getting to sit down with these people and just kind of pick their brain a little bit and learn about their story and learn about some of the struggles that they've had and some of the successes. What it's done is, as a result, we actually had a dinner for a lot of the podcast guests, and I'd say about 90% of them showed up at a restaurant here in Houston recently, and it was just like the energy in the room was just so different than anything I'd ever seen. Just getting all of these different entrepreneurs together and investors and just different people. And it was a really, really cool time. And the oil and gas startup ecosystem here in Houston is booming. I will say not just in Houston too. We're seeing it in Denver. We're seeing it in Oklahoma City. We're seeing it in Midland. It's all over, but obviously Houston is definitely the epicenter of everything oil and gas related. But yeah, the podcast it's been a lot of fun. It's allowed us to kind of get in contact with some people that perhaps we wouldn't normally just cross paths with, and forge some really, really great relationships. I mean, there's some people that came on as guests, and now we text every other day, or we're always talking. And so it's while everything is here for the oil and gas industry and focus on entrepreneurship, you always got to remember that you're in the people business first and foremost, and the relationships that we've built out of the podcast and because of the podcast, I think is probably the biggest benefit to us.
Mhm. Okay, so I just realized that not everyone in my audience has a background in oil and gas, so they might not appreciate the brilliance behind the name. So can you explain what a wildcat is in oil and gas terms?
Yeah, wildcatter is typically, if you were to describe it as somebody who's, it's mostly a term used for people kind of in the early 1900s to maybe 1940s, where they didn't have all the technology that we have today. They didn't have the seismic. They didn't have some of the crazy logging and stuff that we have. Where they would literally just go out and punch a hole in the ground and hope that they can hit oil, right? And then back in the day, it was a lot of just really, really shallow wells, so you don't have to go that far down. And so you've got guys like, I mean, people would say that Rockefeller was a wildcatter. In a way, he was, but I don't think he's one of the more notorious ones. You look at somebody like J. Paul Getty. At one point in time, he was the richest man in the world in like the 1950s and 60s, and he in his early 20s was going out and just punching holes all across Oklahoma, and was out there doing all the work himself. And that is really like just like the spirit of a wildcatter. It's somebody who is willing to take a lot of risks. They're essentially seen as somebody who's kind of like a gambler, and that still carries through to a lot of the older generation that we see today of people who've gone out and started oil and gas companies. That's the lifestyle that they want. It's a lot of risk, a lot of reward. Sometimes you lose it all. Sometimes you go all in, and the house takes it. So that's what a wildcatter is. And obviously we just kind of paired that with digital wildcatters, because I think that the next kind of revolution that we're seeing in the oil and gas industry is that everything digital is transforming that, from the content to the media to the I guess the dissemination of different information, through podcast and through YouTube and all that kind of stuff, but also just the different technologies that we're seeing and how the digital transformation in this industry is going to radically transform the way that these oil and gas operators operate today. The service companies, everybody is being affected by that, and figuring out how can we use some of the latest technologies that we've developed to make these operations more efficient, more safe, and more profitable.
Hmm. Perfect. So let's talk a bit about the startups and the businesses you talk to in your podcast, and even you yourself with your businesses that you run. You're in a very unique position where you very often get to speak to people who are actively starting their own businesses, or people who are running corporations in the oil and gas space, and you get to hear about their stories of how they started up. I listen to the podcast a lot, and it really humanizes the effort of trying to create your own independence, just aside from the oil and gas industry. This drive to want to have something that's your own, something you fully control, and really drive new change and innovations. And sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's very difficult to introduce new ideas, especially to the oil industry that has been almost static in some ways over the past few years. So, like through your experiences speaking to people, what has been like a unifying factor? Maybe it's the challenges they faced, or just the drive behind wanting to seek their own independence and really innovate the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, there's a few things. I think you're seeing that entrepreneurship more times than not is something that is it's something that you're kind of just born with. I think there's kind of just like a gene. Not to say that you don't realize that you can go a while in your life and realize that you kind of have that ability, or that like the kind of need to be an entrepreneurship. Maybe you just don't discover it till later in life. I've kind of found that to be true with a lot of people that we talk with. It's just that this is the only way of life that they know or they want to be a part of. I know guys who would rather take, $30,000 a year as opposed to making $500,000 a year for a big company and working for somebody else, just out of principle of just kind of working for themselves. I think another reassuring thing has been that before we did the podcast, a lot of times we kind of felt like, entrepreneurship is very lonely. There's very high peaks and very low valleys, and I've always said that there's like two different feelings in entrepreneurship. It's either pure bliss, you're on top of the world, you're on cloud nine, or pure agony, to where you're just stomachs and knots because you're trying to figure out how are you going to survive till next week or next month or something. And there's really not a whole lot in between. It's just kind of one or the other. And so I think sitting down with these individuals and kind of hearing their stories, understanding that everybody kind of goes through their dark periods, especially in the beginning of kind of launching a startup. You're risking everything. You're possibly putting yourself and maybe even your family's livelihood at stake. But I think it's such a good thing. I think even having some rough patches, once you're already established as an entrepreneur, to where a lot of things kind of fall apart all at once, And I think it allows you to kind of see what you're still made of. And I think it's a fun challenge. But being able to hear those struggles and let you know that you're not alone and let you know that everybody kind of goes through that. And so it's just very reassuring to know that we're all kind of on the same page. Let's see if there's any other kind of takeaways from here. I think that's mostly. I mean, I think the last thing would be just everybody wants to make an impact on this industry, and they're extremely passionate about it. It's we love what we do, and we want to make this industry as sexy as something like Silicon Valley. We're changing the way that we work, we're changing the way that we dress, we're changing the way that we talk, we're changing the way that we communicate. And I think the podcast has allowed us to kind of push that narrative a little bit, to kind of help be a catalyst to change in the industry, to kind of make an industry that not only that we want to work in, but an industry that our kids can work in and be fun. We can get a lot of young people into the industry. Obviously there's some challenges. It's a very cyclical industry. One of the first things, especially in upstream, is um, bad times come. Prices sink, or they're not meeting their projected targets or something. The first thing to go is people. And I think that's something that has to change. And I think it's just because that's the way that things have always been done. So it does make it a challenging environment to try to get more people in the industry if they're constantly worried about whether they're going to lose their job or not. But I think the industry is headed in the right direction. I think there's going to be a lot more, consolidation, especially this year. I mean, there's been a lot of things I'm sure you've seen in the news of, Wall Street has kind of eaten some of these companies alive. But it's one of the challenges that we have to deal with as an industry moving forward. But I will say that I think we are headed in the right direction.
Mm, most definitely. So, another factor about the podcast that I listen to and about the businesses that kind of crop up these days is the technology behind them, and we've seen a lot about investments into into data analytics and AI in the past few years, especially since the oil prices have kind of forced the industry to be more efficient in their operations and really take more care about how they dispense just their property and their people. So they want to get the most out of the least amount of people and equipment investments. So you get to talk to a lot of these people bringing technologies into the industry. A bit recently, I listened to your most recent episode. I was talking about having a digital marketplace where people could rent out equipment, and that sounds like a very useful tool. But it also sounds like something that I can't believe it wasn't already there. So that gives the impression that most of the useful technology and really digital innovations are just coming out now into the industry. So I have two questions to this. One, what are the new technologies that kind of cropping out, and why is it that these weren't in place before? Why is everything just kind of happening at the same time right now?
So I'll answer your second question first. So the reason being is that oil and gas has traditionally been about 20 years behind on technology that is used in-house, so in the headquarters. It's completely different when we're talking about technology that's in the field and that's downhole. That stuff is like cutting edge. It rivals that of like, NASA or any other kind of space program. It's the most advanced technology in the world. But when it comes into their office and how they're managing data and some of their processes and workflows and stuff, there's a lot of opportunity, to say the least. Like I said, it's about 20 years behind. And so as a result, a lot of the things that we do and a lot of things that we see are not necessarily, not say everything, there's two categories. A lot are not really novel concepts, like Wellhub with my company. It's not a novel concept. It's something that's been done in other industries before. I'm just doing it specifically for oil and gas operators. And so I'm taking some of the best technology that has never been used in the oil and gas industry, it's straight from Silicon Valley, and applying it to this new subset. Hitch that you just mentioned with the rental marketplace, yeah, you would think that that would be something that existed, but it didn't. There's a lot of companies like that you would have thought would have existed that were started in the last couple of years and are now huge companies. Now on the other side, there are a lot of technologies that we haven't seen anywhere else because they're not applicable to other industries, and so it is some pretty cool cutting edge stuff. There's we've had just so many advances in technology, especially on the software side, that there's so many cool things that we can do today. But I think the challenge is more so culturally than it is technologically, because traditionally we've seen a lot of resistance to change. Especially if somebody likes a certain system or a certain software application, whatever, it's very hard to get them to kind of entertain the idea of switching over to something new. So that's something to keep in mind. But that is also changing as more young people are getting into the industry, and as more young people are also becoming positioned into leadership positions.
Okay. So that is very well said. So right now, what about in terms of things that you feel are disrupting the industry as far as technology is concerned from the front end, basically, in terms of how people handle their workflow, and especially in terms of data analytics and technology of that nature, because these days more young people are really learning the importance that data has. Some of the biggest companies in the world right now, like your Amazons, your Facebooks, your Google, they really found a way to monetize data information. And I think in our generation, data has to be the most valuable resource, even arguably way more valuable than all right now. And people really found new innovative ways to make the most of the data they collect and the data they have. And that's a trend that's slowly sipping into the oil industry, especially for new startups. We're really seeing opportunity in places where these systems weren't in place necessarily, especially in a place like America, where you have so many private operators and people who really want to save as much money as they can while doing the best job possible. So in terms of these kind of technologies, have you had any experience with any that you would like to share, especially with what you guys are doing at Wellhub?
There's a lot of different disruptive technologies, but I'm obviously biased because of my work with Wellhub, and then before that of GDS, where and the combined two is really just solving a single issue, and that issue is that 80% of the time employees at oil and gas companies are spending 80% of their time on data aggregation and preparation. So what I mean by that is it's gathering field tickets, it's grabbing invoices, it's manual data entry and management. It's combining all of this into spreadsheets for some kind of report for a meeting later in the week. And then as a result, 97% of the data that's collected by these oil and gas companies today is never used. And so I see that as a huge opportunity, especially with what we do at Wellhub, of connecting in all the different data sources to provide, a one single location for all of your well data. And then from there, you can run all sorts of big data analytics and machine learning and AI and all that kind of cool stuff. So I'm obviously biased. I think that's going to be the most disruptive technology in this space. But I think there's also going to be a lot more marketplaces that we're seeing. That's becoming more and more of a trend. We've seen it with Uber. We've seen it with Airbnb. We've seen it with Lyft. We've seen it with all sorts of different things where these companies actually have no assets themselves. Same thing with Hitched. They don't own any equipment themselves, but they're providing a platform for connecting buyers and sellers. We're seeing more and more of that, and I think we're going to see more and more on the land side here in the U.S. of whether you're just purchasing acreage, or you're purchasing producing wells or prospects, or even mineral rights. I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and I think once more of that gets caught up to the digital age, whether that's through just standard databases and technology that we've had for a while, or whether that's through something like blockchain, I think that's going to radically change the way that this industry operates. Because what people don't realize is that most of this industry, and this is true of even the largest oil and gas companies in the world, the Exxon Mobils, the Chevrons, the Shells, those guys, a lot of the work is still done on paper. A lot of the work is still done in spreadsheets. And so you would think that a lot of these companies have a lot of really, really advanced analytics and stuff. But that's not necessarily the case. But my focus isn't predominantly on those companies. My focus is mostly on the bulk of the market, the producers that are making up most of our oil production. And those are the mid-market guys. Those are the guys that they're not too small, but they're not too large. But they typically just don't have a whole lot of technical expertise as it pertains to data. And so there's just a huge opportunity to help these guys um, just really come into the 21st century and leverage more data. I'm of the belief that if a company's been around long enough and they're truly not using 97% of their data, that I think they would find a lot more oil in their own file cabinets and in their databases than they would by just punching more holes in the ground. Because if you have that data, you can drive so many massive insights from that, and optimize your existing operations, or possibly even find more offset well opportunities on your existing leases.
Very interesting. Okay, so finding oil. I have to ask this question because about 18% of my audience is from America, and then the rest of my audience is scattered pretty much everywhere around the world. So, the concept of an individual owning their own oil field and not having it through international oil companies, or like all the mineral rights being owned by the government and some local oil companies that kind of have like an operational monopoly over these assets. So, can you explain how it's possible, first of all, that a private individual can own an oil field to start with, and what it's like managing it and running it?
Yeah, so it all kind of comes down to law here in the U.S. So obviously, the United States hasn't been around that long. We was obviously kind of founded after the whole revolution in 1776. I don't know exactly the time frame whenever we were establishing. I know surface rights have always been a thing. Back in the day, here in the U.S., it was the government would essentially offer up parcels of land for free, and so you would literally have a stake, and you'd go put your stake in it, and then now that was your piece of land. And then they did all the paperwork and stuff afterwards. I'm not really sure at what point in time people started caring about mineral rights. I want to say it's probably the late 1800s, maybe the early 1900s. And so there's actually a separation between the surface rights, so possibly like the first 80 feet or so of dirt, that's surface rights, and then below that is mineral rights. So I have a ranch. It's about 50 acres outside of Tyler, Texas, and we don't own any of the mineral rights. We own all the surface rights, and that's standard. Typically, the people who own the surface rights don't own the mineral rights, and so you have to find out who owns them, because most likely it was somebody who owned them 100 years ago. And the way that the law works is that it gets passed down from generation to generation, just three different heirs. And so a lot of the times where it started off with one owner, now you have 35 or 40 owners who all own fractional ownership of those minerals. So if you're an oil and gas company and you're wanting to drill on a certain piece of land, you have to essentially lease those mineral rights from these owners. And so you structure a lease in which these guys get paid out based on revenue. So usually they'll get like I think it's like 1/8 or something of production that gets paid out to them. So they'll get checks every single month based on the production of the wells that are coming out of their mineral rights.
Okay. So, what about you running? How did you first acquire all fields? You and Collin, you said, and like now, just day to day operations. What takes up the bulk of your time, and really, what are the challenges you face in terms of just running it and just the operational aspect to it?
We found our assets. We were originally planning on raising $100 million from a private equity firm to go out and do what is called a non-op strategy. So there's two different kinds of oil and gas companies. There's an operated oil and gas company, so you own the assets and you obviously you're maintaining the operations yourself, right? So you are operating those. Then there's the non-op companies, which you're partnering with an operated company. You're owning a minority ownership stake in these wells, but you're not operating them themselves. You're operating them yourself. You're acting more so as an investor. And so we were planning on raising $100 million to build a portfolio of assets across the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana. And so going to private equity and trying to raise that kind of money, it's very hard if you've never done it before. And so we figured we needed to buy some assets before we did that. And so we kind of put it out there into the ether that, hey, we're looking to buy some assets. And so we got a whole lot of deals that kind of came in through our network. And we began the due diligence of kind of looking through and seeing if it was something that we were interested in. We kind of had the idea of IRR that we were looking for, so the rate of return, in terms of cash flow as well, and seeing kind of what the margins were. And so we found some through a friend of a friend who had sold off a bunch of his assets. And so he had a kind of a subset of wells that he was looking to get rid of. And so we did the due diligence, decided it was a good package. If anybody is curious, you can go out and see like our first trip out there to these wells. We did a vlog on it on Digital Wildcatters on YouTube. Um, then we just closed the deal, and so we went out and bought these assets, and then now we operate them. So it's been about a year and a half of operating them now. The day to day, I mostly write checks to vendors, and so it's these things are mechanical, right? And so you've got pump jacks, you've got lease roads, you've got saltwater disposal wells that are disposing of all the water that's produced from the well. You've got tanks, you've got all sorts of stuff. We've got guys in the field that are kind of running the operations for us. So it's kind of just overseeing it. It's sometimes it's very passive, to where the wells are pumping, we're selling oil, and we get paid, and then we pay out our vendors, and then we call it a day. Other times something breaks, and we need to spend just a lot of time figuring out what's wrong with it. And so we hire crews, we hire different people, we hire engineers, to problem solve and figure out what the issue is to get the well back online as quickly and as cheaply as possible. So the biggest expenses for the wells that we operate, which is the case for pretty much any wells, is going to be your water cost. So on one well, we have a saltwater disposal well. So all the water that is produced, because when you produce oil, it's not just oil, it comes in water. And so you have to dispose of this water somehow. And so we inject that water back into the formation, not into the exact same formation, but back into the ground. And then if you don't have that, then you have to haul the water. You can't just pour this water on the ground because it's considered brine water. It's contaminated water, right? And so it's not necessarily good for the surface. So you have to haul that off. And so you would essentially have all this water going into a gigantic water tank, and then a truck comes out to the lease and pumps out that water, carries it off, and then you pay the disposal cost for that. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the operations. It's just when things break, you fix them, and then you move on.
Very interesting. So a question that you asked every guest that comes on the show is about climate concerns and climate action. So first off, how often do you get into conversations about environmental issues and climate concerns with people you talk to, or just people in your network space, in your network? Sorry.
Never, actually. I never really get into any kind of climate change conversations. I think we received some flack on oil and gas this week talking about climate change. As Mark has said a million times, yeah, and I'm of the same belief. You're either in a period of global warming or a period of global cooling. And while humans may impact the environment, there's never really been a true, unbiased study that has proven that. And so, yeah, I think just most people are just very misinformed about energy as a whole. I mean, you look at a lot of these like activists and stuff, and they just don't know the first thing about the oil and gas industry. They'll go out and picket a pipeline project or something, but they'll pull up in a Tesla that's made out of like 80% hydrocarbons. And you got to think about, where do you get plastics? Where do you get rubbers? Where do you get circuit boards? Like, where do you get most of the stuff that makes it to where we can enjoy modern civilization today is created from petroleum products. No battery, no renewable energy, no wind energy is going to replace that component of it. Now, could we replace every car with an electric car? Yeah, and I think by like 2040 something, I think a lot of cars will be probably electric. I think that's cool. That's a cool thing, but it's going to have such a small impact on overall global energy production that it's not really even going to be factored in. So a lot of people think that, we just need to get all these cars off the road and that's going to solve the issue. And it's like, no. If you look at third world countries today, what is the difference between a third world country and a thriving country? And it is the access to petroleum products and whether they have an industry around that. Look at every country in the world that has a booming petroleum industry. It's a booming economy. Those go hand in hand. So if anybody ever wants to talk to me about that kind of stuff, I just try to, I guess, educate them a little bit, as to how much of their life is really built upon petroleum products.
That's very interesting, because I think that's also something people don't really take into account of, especially the people who are very vocal and very largely uninformed about how deep petroleum products really aids in day-to-day life. So in terms of how, like, the oil and gas industry obviously going to be here for a very long time, I don't think anybody's disputing that, and even in the most optimistic reports I've read, it pretty much says the same thing. But in terms of energy production and for cars, as you said, that's a completely different story. So in the future, especially in Texas, actually, it's like a hub for different kinds of technologies. Of course, you have the oil and gas space, but I saw a very interesting report that said that the largest renewable energy production is actually in Texas as well. So that came as both a surprise and just it's very telling of how the energy space is evolving right now. So what do you think about that?
I think renewables are a good thing, right? But I'm a realist as well, and if you look at efficiency of the energy that can be extracted from a certain, like a barrel of oil, compared to the energy that can be extracted from, say, like windmills, the cost of extracting that same amount of energy is significantly higher on the renewable side than it is on the oil side. And oil is very expensive, so you can imagine how expensive the renewable side is. So the efficiency is not quite there. The technology is not quite there to make a substantial impact. And then once it does get there, we would here in the U.S. we would essentially have to redo our entire power grid, and so it would be like a $14 trillion project or something, which would be like 20 times larger than any infrastructure project we've ever done in the U.S. So there's a lot of major issues that lie ahead. Not saying that it can't be solved, but it's definitely very, very long term before we'll see renewables kind of at the forefront of our daily lives.
Very interesting. So, in what else? What else? What else do we have to talk about? Uh, yes. So, so more about you and what you guys do. So, if the audience want to find out more about you, where do they go, and where can they find you?
You can go to digitalwildcatters.com. It's got vlogs, podcast. It's got articles. You can sign up for a newsletter, and just kind of keep up to date with everything that we have going on. You can also find me on LinkedIn. You can just type in Jacob Corley. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. So, do you have anything else you would like to tell the audience, kind of like a close up on everything, especially in terms of the way oil and gas is going, like the push away from maybe conventional oil and into more unconventional resources, and especially through all the revolution that happened in the US and natural gas being like the imminent replacement for coal and all of that. So in terms of all of that, in terms of entrepreneurship and like running businesses and having this real drive for independence, so if you could wrap that up in like a statement, how would you put it to someone who you're just talking to about all these things, to just kind of like give them a good understanding and a good pep talk as well, to take hold of their future and really get engaged into what the future of the energy industry looks like?
If you want to build a either solid career or a solid business for yourself, to set yourself up and your family for financial independence long term and hopefully create generational wealth, I don't think there's a better industry in the world that would allow you the same opportunities that the oil and gas industry does today. And I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to be in the oil and gas industry, because you can come in and you can make substantial change in the industry and then be rewarded for it monetarily. So I think it's a super exciting time. I don't really ever see myself leaving this industry at this point. Ended up here by accident, but absolutely love it. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in this industry to dive deep into it. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for listening to the conversation I just had with Jake. This was a very insightful conversation, not just into the oil and gas industry, but also into the spirit of entrepreneurship and really setting yourself apart to be independent and really carve out something for yourself in the industry that you choose. There's a part in the conversation towards the end there that we talked a bit about climate change, and especially how the fossil fuel industry kind of sees climate action and activists especially. This is one of those difficult conversations that I question sometimes. Should it be on the podcast? Should it not be on the podcast? Because there's some consequences that come with it. But I decided that it's something that we do need to talk about, and we do need to demystify some of the myths that are going around climate change and really demonizing the fossil fuel industry. The truth is, as far as we know, the fossil fuel industry does contribute a lot to carbon emissions. That's obvious, everybody knows that. but it also contributes to largely almost every single technological growth that we've had in the past 50-ish years. So it's really unfair to say that all that growth that we all enjoy today, especially in the developed world, doesn't come with some sort of consequence. Now, how we can deal with those consequences going forward, now that's something we can't talk about. And on this podcast, I'm going to make it my mission to have as many voices and as many different opinions as I can about this topic. So if you don't like this conversation today, subscribe. And the next one we're going to have a lot of energy policy analysts and climate activists on the show as well to really bring more voices into this conversation. So thank you for listening. I would really love to hear from you. Get in touch with me via email. Everything will be in the description. And as far as you want to reach out with Jake as well, I'll be putting the links to their vlog for the first time they got their oil field, and also contact information for Jake as well, so you can reach out to him and continue the conversation there. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Get in touch with us anywhere you are. I really love to hear from you. And join us again next week. We're going to be talking about the energy and mining industry in Africa with Dr. Victoria. It's another wonderful conversation, and I hope that you join me again for that. Thank you, and all my best with energy. This is Olubunmi Olajide signing off.